Again, I believe I mentioned this last week, but we're getting near the end of our liturgical year, our liturgical cycle. And so the beginning of Advent in a couple weeks is when, in the Catholic Church, we begin our new year, if you will. And so the readings, as we come to the end of our liturgical cycle that we go through, the readings for the past couple weeks and going forward are ones that speak about really the end of time and these final judgments that are there. They're specifically selected for that purpose to kind of recognize and remind us that at some point in our life, or some point in the life of the world as well, there will be the end of time. And so a lot of these readings in these past couple weeks begin to focus on that, and today certainly is no exception. And so in our gospel, Jesus gives us this parable that I think for most people, the meaning behind it initially is quite obvious. Jesus gives us this parable of this owner who calls his servants together and he hands out talents. Now, talents was a unit of measurement, actually of weight, to find out the value of something that was there. So now it's very interesting, of course, is it gets translated into our English usage. The word talent becomes very obvious, meaning, gifts and abilities that people have. And so naturally, especially we in the English hear this, and of course we can very easily make the association or the analogy of this idea that we need to recognize the talents, the gifts, the abilities that are given to us, and that the purpose of them, the reason that they're given, is to go out and be used in this world. And that, at the end of time, whether it's our own personal passing away, or if it's the end of time and Jesus arrives, which will probably happen about 2 seconds before the Vikings win the Super Bowl. But regardless, there will be this moment when we have to have an accounting of our lives and how we have used this. So that meaning is I think for most listeners is very obvious right at the front and right at the start. But I think we can today ask the question, though, why? Why should I use these talents and these gifts? Why is God going to hold me accountable in this way of using them for others? Why is it so wrong for me to just simply say that I am going to use these talents and these gifts and these abilities for myself? What's wrong with that? Why can't I just say, I've got this and I just want to use it for myself? Why is that so awful? I think there's a hint of an understanding in this when we look at what Jesus gives the title of the servant who buried the treasure. He says to him, he calls him the wicked, lazy servant. Wicked and lazy. And as I was thinking about this, I thought of, then what does that mean the other servants were? Well, the word lazy, then the opposite, I would say, of the word lazy is the word diligent. And the word diligent actually comes from the Latin diligere, which means to love. See, the lazy servant that was there was one who turned inward, was one who focused on himself, was one who said the only thing that matters is me in this existence. Whereas the other servants, taking the talents, went out and said, I need to think about the other. I need to pay attention to the other. I need to be one who says, I am going to now go outside of myself and be one who encounters and enriches the others around me. And what's so powerful when we really think about that is ultimately why you and I have been made. I know I've preached about it before, but go all the way back to the very beginning when God creates human beings. Remember, God creates human beings in his image and his likeness. We hear that in Genesis. What does that mean? Does that mean we physically look like God? Well, not exactly. But rather what that means, well, okay, here, quick, we'll see how much you paid attention in religion class. All right, how many gods do we believe in? Okay, wow, we are way okay, just to, we're going to profess our creed here in just an hour and a half. And, no, I'm kidding. Oh, wait, no, the Vikings don't kick off till 8 p.m. All right, we got plenty of time. No. But no, so we're going to say we believe in how many gods? Okay, very good. We're awake, all right. And then how many persons is this God? 3, okay, very good. Now, math majors, just set that aside for a second. But we believe in one God who's 3 persons from the very beginning. And if you look in the book of Genesis, God even says, let us make man in our image and our likeness. This idea of this 3 persons are there. What does this mean? Well, from the very beginning, God has been, is, and will always be a community of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit living in love of one another. And so when you and I were made in the image and the likeness of God, we were made for community. We were made to go beyond ourselves, not go internal, but go external, and say, I'm going to love God and love my neighbor. And this is what we were made to do. So as a result, living a selfish way, living in one who says, I'm only going to pay attention to me, is actually antithetical to how we've been made to be. And so when God calls that one a wicked and lazy servant, in a certain sense, he's saying, you are living the opposite of how you've been designed. And think about this. We even know this, even instinctually, humanity, even apart from our religion, even recognizes this. And I think this was highlighted very much in, there's an author, David Brooks, who wrote a book, The Road to Character. And at the very beginning, in the intro of this book, is a very interesting thing. He makes a curious reflection on our lives and what he talks about of virtues and this idea of what we hold up in a society. And he makes a distinction between what he calls resume virtues, the ones that you put down when you're applying for work, and then what he calls eulogy virtues. He says so much of our life we spend working on building our resume virtues. Oh, am I really good at this skill? Am I really good at this talent? Do I do these types of things? But when it comes time for funerals and people get up and they eulogize us up in front, what do they focus on? What are the things that they talk about? They don't talk about, wow, yeah, he spent every Saturday poring over his investment portfolio. He really did really well on Saturdays, navel gazing. What are the things that we highlight just as human beings? He cared for his neighbor. He was somebody you wanted to live next to. She was somebody who went so far beyond herself that she was caring for the children in the neighborhood. She was one that we knew, the kids in the neighborhood could always go over there and she would treat them with love and bring them in, right? And we even hear that in our first reading too. In our first reading, the way that this beautiful wife is described in this way. He says, the author of Proverbs here says, her value is far beyond pearls because, what does she do? She reaches out her hands to the poor, going beyond herself, and extends her arms to the needy. This woman who fears the Lord, paying attention to God, is to be praised. And so it's this recognition that these talents, these gifts, are given really to go beyond ourselves. And the fact of the matter is, when we go outside of ourselves, when we pay attention to God and our neighbor and put the effort in, we actually are happier. I remember, so as I've shared with you before, I had 11 years in my priesthood was in the chaplaincy work in high schools in teaching that was there. So I got a real big peek into the world of teaching, and I lived it for 11 years, And one of the things that you could easily observe, and I'm sure you can remember back to when you were in elementary, middle school, or high school. Maybe you don't want to remember middle school. Ugh, that's kind of, but thinking back to those teachers, the ones that you really remember, the ones that you really care a lot about, the ones that you say had an impact, my guess is those teachers were not ones that were primarily focused on getting the grading done, on making sure that everything was connected to the standards for curriculum. Those were probably the teachers who went outside of themselves and paid attention to you. Were the ones who said, I'm going to invest in my students in their personal realities, not just treat them as that, as some sort of conveyor belt of nameless people that come through, but rather wanted to get to know you, was interested in who you were and how you were doing. Those are the teachers, because I guarantee you, any of you that are looking to go into teaching, one of the ways to be an absolute miserable teacher is don't focus on your students. Only focus on the homework grading that's there. Only focus on how much trouble it is to make everything match the curriculum, the standards that are there. But you want to be a happy teacher? Pay attention to the kids. Find out what's going on in their lives. Is that more work? Yeah. Is that sometimes incredible emotional investment as well? Absolutely. But wow, is it a beautiful thing and a path to great, great happiness that's there as well. So our Lord gives us this parable to awaken within us the reality of why were you and I given talents? Why were we given the gift of our time here on earth, however long or short it may be? We're not given to turn inward on ourselves, but rather to go outside of ourselves, to love God and love our neighbor. And so your homework assignment, I was a teacher, your homework assignment this week, I'm going to encourage you in your times of prayer, take some time of prayer and do a genuine examination and ask, what are the talents and the gifts that God has given me? Now, they might be obvious to you, or there might be ones that are hidden underneath. Maybe they are talents of things like the ability to play music in those ways. But maybe they're the talent simply of, God blessed me with kind of a bubbly personality to meet people. Do I use that just to have fun at a party? Or do I use that as a means to invite people to get to know Jesus and invite them to come to church? Maybe not the 8 a.m. Mass, that's a little early, but looking at these ways and use that. Or maybe you have other gifts and talents that in some way the Lord wants you to do this. If we put them at the disposal and we say, Lord, thank you, I will guarantee two things. One, you will be happier. You'll be happier because you're living out those eulogy virtues. Those ones that people, when your time comes and you pass away from this earth, that people will go out of their way to say, oh yeah, he or she lived in this way. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful. And the second is, when that time comes that you and I have to meet Jesus face to face, he doesn't say, go off in the darkness for you buried those talents I gave you. But rather he'll say, come in. Come into the joys of heaven. Come into this wonderful banquet. Share in your Master's joy.